everyone! Today I'm going to show you how to sew the Tiny Treasures basket and tray. This is a free pattern designed by Anna Graham of Noodlehead, and it's from Robert Kaufman Fabrics. I'm going to link below where you can download the pattern and instructions. Today I'm going to walk you through all the steps required to sew this project and just a couple ways that I kind of changed up the pattern a little bit for my needs. All right, let's get started. So let's start by going over all the supplies that we'll need. Of course, I have the pattern printed out right here. So you're gonna need a 1/4 yard of fabric to use for the binding. You'll need a 1/2 yard of fabric for the outside of the basket and tray. You'll need another 1/2 yard to use for the lining. You're going to want 1 yard of heavyweight fusible interfacing and 1 yard of medium weight fusible interfacing. This is my heavyweight interfacing, and I'm using Pelon 71F. So that's a really stiff interfacing. And then here is more of a mid-weight fusible interfacing. I'm using Pelon Craft Fuse 808. You're also going to want a nice long ruler, preferably a clear ruler, something to mark your fabric with, either a rotary cutter or some fabric shears, and your coordinating sewing machine thread. So whether you are sewing the basket or the tray, all the sewing instructions are basically going to be the same. You're just going to start out with different sized fabric pieces. So I'm going to start by cutting out my stiff interfacing, and then I'm going to use that sort of as a template to cut out my other pieces. So if you're making the basket, which is what I'm going to be making today, you want to cut one 15-inch by 15-inch square. And I'm just using a sheet of paper here to help me get a nice square corner at 90 degrees. So I'm drawing my 15-inch square. If you are making the smaller tray, you can use a sheet of paper as your template and cut out an 8.5-inch by 11-inch rectangle. Once I've cut this out from my stiff interfacing, I'm going to use this piece as a template, basically as my pattern piece, and I will cut out another 15-inch square from my other medium weight interfacing and my exterior fabric and my lining fabric. I just lay my exterior fabric and my lining fabric on top of each other so that I can cut out both of them at the same time. So on the last page of the pattern instructions, you'll find a couple of darts, and you'll want to cut out whichever dart you're using. Since I'm making the basket, I'm going to cut out the larger dart. Then use that dart template to trace the darts onto each corner of your interfacing. So I do this on my midweight interfacing and my heavyweight interfacing. Then go back and cut out all of the darts from the interfacing. You'll want to place the stiff heavyweight interfacing face down so that the glue side is facing the wrong side of your lining fabric. Then I'm just going to flip it over, and I like to initially at least fuse from the fabric side. So to do that, I'm just going to use my iron on the wool or medium setting, and I'm going to use the sort of gliding motion and lightly iron over this, starting from the center and working my way out. Next, I place a damp press cloth on top, and Now I'm going to hold my iron in place for about 10 to 15 seconds on each spot. Then I lift it, move it over slightly until the entire area is completely fused. Once I'm happy with that, I can turn off the steam on my iron, go in and give the fabric one last press to try to get out any moisture. Now I'm going to use a similar method to fuse the medium weight interfacing to the wrong side of my exterior fabric. So to do this, I just place the interfacing with the glue scratchy side down on the wrong side of the exterior fabric, just line it up, and then I will take my press cloth, lay it over top, and fuse in sections just as I did with the other piece. Now I'm going to sew the darts. So to do this, I'm just going to fold the fabric so that it's right sides together at each corner, making sure that the interfacing is lining up. And then I'm going to stitch right along the interfacing, making sure to backstitch at the beginning and at the end of this dart. And I'm going to sew right next to it, but not through this interfacing because that interfacing is really thick. Then I'm going to repeat this on all 4 corners of the lining and the exterior. To remove some of the bulk, I'm going to trim down my seam allowance to about 1/2 inch, then clip to the point of each dart. Be careful not to cut through your stitching, but clip as close to it as you can get. Then I'll press my seam allowances open. Now to assemble the basket, you're going to take the outer piece and turn it so that it's right sides out. Leave the lining so that the right side is on the inside and place it into the outer piece. Try to line up the corner darts as best as you can and try to work the top edges together. If you have quilting clips, you can use those to hold everything together along the top edge. So now I just need to make my binding. So I need to cut a 2-inch wide strip of fabric. Now normally when you make bias tape, you cut it on a 45-degree angle, but because I don't really need this binding to stretch or go around any sharp curves, it's fine to cut it on the straight grain. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm just cutting out on the fold here. So I'll end up with a strip that's about 2 inches wide by about 44 inches long. That's the full width of my fabric. So this pattern does call for leather handles and rivets to attach them, but because those things are a little bit hard to source for some people, I wanted to show you how to make your own out of fabric. So what I've done here is I've cut 2 rectangles of fabric that are 3 inches wide by 9 inches long, and those will be my handles. Now I'm going to cut a bit of interfacing. So I'm going to cut a strip of fabric that is 3/4 of an inch wide. That's the width of the handles. And I'll need about 18 inches of it, which I'll then cut down so that I have 2 strips that are 8.5 inches by 3/4 of an inch. So to make my handles, I'm going to take my fabric and fold it so that it is wrong sides together, so the right side of the fabric should be facing out, and just fold it in half lengthwise and press. Now unfold and place your strip of interfacing so that it is pressed right up against that center crease you just made. You can see that my strip of medium weight interfacing is about 1/4 inch shorter on each end than the fabric, and that's how I want it. Then refold and press to fuse. Now unfold again, and now you're going to take the raw edge of your seam allowance and fold it towards the center so that it's going over the area that you just applied the interfacing to, and press it down. Fold the other raw edge in so that it matches the width of the other side, and press. I also need to prepare my binding. To do this, I'm going to fold my binding strip in half lengthwise so that the wrong sides are together, so the right sides of the fabric are facing out. Do this along the whole length of the strip. Now unfold your fabric and take the raw edges and fold them in towards that center crease line. You can do this with just one edge at a time, or you can try to do both at the same time like I'm doing here. Also, if you have a bias tape maker, you could use that instead of doing it manually like I'm doing here. Now the last step is to fold it in half one more time and press. The finished binding should be about 1/2 inch wide. Now last of all, before I attach my binding, I am going to unfold one end and fold over one of the short ends towards the wrong side of the fabric by about 1/4 of an inch, and then I'm going to refold the binding into place, and now it's ready to attach to my basket. When you're ready to attach your binding, you just unfold the binding, and you're going to place the right side of the binding against the right side of the lining. So the binding is going to go around the inside of the basket. We're going to be stitching this at 1/2 inch, so we're basically going to be stitching right in that first fold line. So I'm not using any pins or anything to attach the binding first. I'll just pull it into place and align it with the top edge as I'm sewing. So this part can be a little bit tricky just because you've got this 3-dimensional object now going through your sewing machine. So just take your time with it. If you've got a sewing awl or something that can help you kind of maneuver the binding, that can be really helpful. That's what I'm using here. Now I'm almost back to where I started, so I'm just going to stitch about half an inch past my beginning point. And once I've done that, I can backstitch and then I'll cut off any extra binding. So now I need to finish preparing my handles. I'm using an edge stitch foot and I am stitching down the long edge that's open on my handle. I'm stitching about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. Once I've done that, I'll flip this around and stitch all the way down the other side, the folded side. Now I'm just marking about 2 inches away from my corner seam on each side here so that I can place my handle. Now I'm lining up my handle so that the raw edges are close to the top of the basket, and I'm going to clip it in place. To attach my handles, I'm stitching at half an inch right over the stitching that I've already done to attach the binding. Now before I go ahead and enclose the top with the binding, I'm just going to trim it down slightly by about 1/8 of an inch, just because I've got a lot of bulk here and I think my binding is going to struggle to fit over all of it. So I'll just trim it down and neaten up the edge. Now fold the binding over to enclose the top of the basket. I'm just using clips to hold it in place. So as I stitch, I want to make sure that the binding is just covering the line of stitching that goes around the top. And I'm just hand stitching this in place using a hidden stitch called a ladder stitch. And to do this, to start off, I just sew a couple of stitches in place to secure my threads. You could also tie a little knot. And as I'm going, I'm stitching one stitch from right to left on the basket. So there you can see I've got one stitch moving over on the basket side. Pull that through using my thimble to push it. And now I'm going to go straight up from there and have a stitch go from right to left, right along the fold of the binding. And now from there, straight down, I'll go in to the basket, and then we'll go over a bit to the left. And I definitely recommend using a thimble going through this basket because it's quite thick. It can take just like a little bit of finessing where that overlap is to get it to look nice and lay flat. But I'm just going to do that same ladder stitch all the way around. You can use a different hand stitch if you like, but this one creates a really nice seamless look, so you won't see any visible stitching. So here I am continuing to do this ladder stitch all the way around the top of the basket, and every inch or so I'll just stop and kind of pull on my thread to tighten everything up, and when I do that, it really makes the stitches completely disappear. So I'll do maybe 4 stitches in a row without tightening it completely, and then pull everything taut. So the last thing I need to do is secure my handles. So I am just pulling the handles up towards the top of the basket, and I'm gonna stitch them in place. So I'm stitching them in place about halfway between the bottom of the binding and the top of the binding. And that is my basket finished. So as you can see, I also made the tray pattern, and everything about that was the same, except I didn't make handles for that one. Here's a closer look at that binding, all completely hand stitched, and my handles secured. So I hope you found this video helpful and you're able to make your own basket or tray. Happy sewing!